She said she was working late, but I found something in her purse that changed everything. Hey there. If you love real stories with shocking twists, hit that subscribe button and like this video. You don't want to miss what happens next. Dmitry woke up at 6 a.m. as usual, but the apartment felt wrong. The silence was thick, like fog. He paused, listening. A distant engine rumbled outside, and soft rain tapped on the roof. Nina was still asleep, curled under the blanket, her breathing calm, but something in the air had changed. Lately, she had become different, always staying late at work, blaming deadlines. Her phone, once left on the table, never left her side when it rang. She quietly stepped out of the room. They used to talk about everything, even the neighbor's cat. Now, cold, distant replies. That morning, he tried to convince himself it was nothing. He brewed tea and made her a sandwich, even though she never ate in the mornings. But maybe today, before leaving, he looked at her one more time. Her face seemed unfamiliar, like a stranger's. At work, the rhythm of the machine was calming, but thoughts kept breaking through. His friend Valera joked with him, but Dmitry barely smiled. Later, at the store, something caught his eye. A shiny business card for a bar. He had seen one just like on Nina's desk. She quickly hid it, but he remembered. At home, everything looked normal. Nina on the couch, smiling at her phone. When he asked how her day was, she replied, "Fine," without even looking up at dinner. Silence, like two strangers sharing a table. Later that night, he looked through her bag, lipstick, phone, keys, and the same golden business card from the bar. She wished him good night. With a hollow smile, he sat in the kitchen, staring at cold tea. Something had cracked between them. Their life had become a stage. Actors reading from a script they no longer believed. When she said again that she'd be working late, something inside him snapped. He followed her from a distance. She got in a taxi. So did he. The car stopped at a brightly lit bar. Moonlight Lounge. He waited, then, after 10 minutes, went inside. There she was, sitting with a man, tall, confident, expensive watch. They laughed. She leaned and touched his hand. It wasn't just a friendly meeting. It was betrayal, pure and undeniable. Dmitry turned and walked out. The cold air hit his face, but couldn't cool the fire inside. Everything he thought he knew shattered. That night, when Nina returned, he said nothing, just watched her like a stranger, and that's when the thought came, quiet, cold, a thought of revenge. But a part of him craved something more. He sat down at the table and placed a notebook in front of him. On its clean page, the first thing he wrote was a question. What do I want? Dmitry stared at those words for a long time, as if trying to peer deep inside himself. And suddenly, everything became clear. He didn't just want the truth. He wanted Nina and her lover to understand how deeply they had betrayed him. He wanted them to feel the pain he felt. The idea of revenge began to take shape. Dmitry knew he needed a plan, carefully thought out and precise. Like a technical drawing, his job as a machinist had always demanded accuracy and attention to detail. And now, he decided to apply those same skills to his personal life. Nina left for work, the house falling into its usual silence. Dmitry saw her off without a word, offering only a cold nod when she said, "I'll probably be home late. We're submitting the project." She didn't even try to lie convincingly. That only fueled his anger. As soon as the door closed behind her, Dmitry opened his laptop. He needed more information about her lover. The starting point was obvious. The very place where he'd seen them together turned out to be a popular downtown venue. Dmitry found the man's social media page, and then photos from various events. Among them were pictures from corporate parties. On one of them, he recognized the man sitting next to Nina, tall, fit, with a smug smile, standing beside the CEO of a large company. Suddenly, he found the name, Andrei Lazarev, Chief Financial Officer. Dmitry saved the photo, noting how confident and untouchable Lazarev appeared. He spent the next few hours researching him online. There were plenty of interviews and articles praising his success. Lavish pictures of expensive cars and luxury vacations only deepened Dmitry's disgust. But one detail caught his attention. In a photo taken 6 months ago, Lazarev stood next to a car that was listed as stolen in a police report. Dmitry took a screenshot. This could come in handy. The plan was starting to take shape. He understood. The revenge had to be destructive. Nina and Andrei had to feel what it was like to lose everything. The first step was financial. Dmitry remembered that Nina always fueled up at the same gas station on her way home. He installed an app that allowed him to track her bank card's movements. Now, he could always know where she was. The second step involved surveillance. He installed a small recording device in her handbag. If she met with Andre, he'd hear it. The third step involved Andre himself. Dmitry contacted an old friend, Pavel, who worked for a private security firm. "Hey, I need a favor. I need info on someone." Pavel wasn't surprised. A few days later, he delivered minor offenses, some car loan debt, and, most importantly, Lazarev's home address. Dmitry soon had everything he needed. As it turned out, Nina was meeting Andre regularly. Voice recordings confirmed this. She spoke about plans for the future, about trips Dmitry knew nothing about, but the worst blow came when he heard her say, "I'm tired of lying. I'll tell him I'm leaving soon." Those words squeezed his heart. But along with pain came rage. He wouldn't let her go so easily. She had to face the consequences of her actions. In the days that followed, Dmitry became even more detail-oriented. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. Andre, with his smug success, would lose everything: his reputation, his wealth, his connections. As for Nina, her fate would be different. One evening, Dmitry sat in the kitchen, watching snowflakes drift gently past the window. On the table lay the notebook, now filled with neat lines of planning. The plan was complete now. He just had to wait for the right moment to act. When Nina came home, she smiled as usual and casually said, "Long day, deadlines." Dmitry looked up, forcing a calm expression. "How was your day?" "Tiring," she replied curtly, heading to the bedroom. He watched her go, then looked back at his notebook. Tomorrow, everything would begin. Winter had arrived suddenly, as if someone had flipped a switch, wrapping the city in snow and silence. Dmitry walked home after a long shift at the factory, where the repetitive sound of machines only amplified his thoughts of Nina and her betrayal. He felt drained. The revenge plan was almost ready, but something inside remained unsettled. Part of his soul still clung to memories of a Nina he had lived with for 10 years, but the colder, more calculating side of him knew there was no room for weakness. He pulled up the collar of his coat and quickened his pace. But when he entered a store for groceries, he was suddenly struck by the pointlessness of it all. Why buy food for a family that no longer existed? "Sorry," a voice broke through his thoughts. He turned sharply to see a woman drop her bag. Potatoes and oranges rolled across the floor. She looked embarrassed as the cashier sighed impatiently. "Let me help," Dmitry said without thinking, crouching to pick up the vegetables. "Thank you," she said, looking at him with eyes that seemed surprisingly warm despite her tired face. They quickly gathered everything, and as she stood up, she said, "Sorry for the trouble." "It's nothing," Dmitry replied. "Are you in a hurry?" "Not really, just one of those tough days," she admitted, a little flustered. Something about her voice struck a chord in him. There was pain in it. "Dmitry." He introduced himself. "Irina," she replied with a faint smile. "Can I help carry your bags?" She hesitated, then nodded. As they walked through the snow-covered streets, Dmitry learned she had recently moved to the neighborhood. Her life had also been far from ideal: an abusive ex-husband, years of misery, and finally, she left it all behind. "It was hard to start over," she said, pausing in front of her building, "but I don't regret it. Sometimes you have to leave everything to save yourself." Her words pierced him. Maybe he, too, needed to leave something behind. Her hands trembled as she tried to say something, but no words came. Dmitry felt that his control over the situation had reached its peak. That night, Nina went to the bedroom alone. Dmitry stayed in the kitchen, reflecting on everything that had happened. The conversation with her had been painful, yet somehow relieving. No more secrets, and yet he didn't feel victorious. The revenge was already complete. But what came after? He realized it was time to stop living in the past and start looking for a new future. A future where there was no place for Nina or her lies. He remembered Irina, her sincerity, her warm smile. Dmitry suddenly realized that this woman had become more than just a casual acquaintance. She symbolized the idea that life could be different. Now that everything was clear, Dmitry understood. Ahead lay many decisions, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to leave the past behind. A week had passed since Dmitry and Nina had finally talked. If one could even call a conversation, it was more an exchange of accusations and disappointment. Nina was growing more distant, as if sensing she stood at the edge of a cliff, not yet understanding how to cross it. Dmitri, on the other hand, felt a quiet relief the truth had come out along with it. His old feelings for Nina had surfaced, only to fade away. She was no longer the woman she used to be. The ease with which she used to lie and hide her betrayal had vanished now. Fear had settled in her eyes. She spent less time out in the evenings, staying home more often, not because she wanted to, but because she didn't know where else to go. One day, Dmitri came home from the factory and found her sitting on the couch with a glass of wine. It was unusual. Nina rarely drank at home. Especially alone, her face looked distant, her eyes red, as if she'd been crying. "Are you okay?" he asked. Taking off his coat, Nina flinched. Not expecting to hear his voice, she tried to smile, but it was unconvincing. "Just thinking," she said quietly. Dmitri sat down at the table. Watching her, she looked exhausted, and despite everything that had happened, a flicker of pity still lived in him. "Thinking about Lazarev?" he asked bluntly. She lowered her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. There was a pause. Dmitri noticed her fingers tapping nervously on the wine glass. "He stopped replying to me ever since his problems began," she said. "I tried calling, but he just ignores me." Dmitri couldn't help but smirk. It was all so predictable. A man like Lazarev wouldn't cling to someone who no longer brought him any benefit. "And what are you going to do?" he asked, trying not to sound too harsh. Nina looked up at him. Her eyes held a strange mix of guilt and despair. "I don't know, I feel like I've lost everything." Her words sounded like a quiet confession of defeat, but Dmitri didn't want to give in to pity. She had chosen this path. In the following days, Nina kept retreating into herself. Dmitri noticed her efforts to return to a normal rhythm, but her old confidence was gone. She tried to start conversations, asked about his work, about how his day went, but Dmitri answered in short phrases. It was hard to open up to her again after everything. One night, he heard her crying. Her muffled sobs came from the bedroom while he lay on the couch. Wrapped in a blanket, Dmitri lay still, listening for a long time. Then he suddenly realized he didn't feel pain anymore. Her tears no longer stirred in him the urge to comfort her. They were just echoes of something that had already died. One evening, on his way home, Dmitri saw a familiar figure near the building. It was Irina. She stood waiting with a gentle smile on her face. "Hi," she said as he approached. "Hi," Dmitri replied, pleasantly surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Just passing by and thought. We haven't talked in a while, maybe coffee," she offered. Together, they walked to the same little cafe where they had met before. The place was quiet and cozy. Their conversation reminded Dmitri that the world was larger than his problems with Nina. Irina shared that she was planning to open a small tailoring workshop. She had finally saved enough to rent a space. Dmitri listened with genuine interest, realizing that her energy and determination inspired him. "And you?" she asked warmly. "How are you?" Dmitri took a sip of coffee and thought for a moment. "For the first time in a long while, I feel like I'm moving forward." Irina nodded. Her gaze was full of understanding. "That's good. You deserve that." When he returned home, Nina was sitting on the couch again, but this time she was ready to talk. He was surprised. These were her first words of apology throughout the entire conflict. "For what?" he asked, unable to hide his skepticism. "For everything," she replied, her voice trembling. "For lying to you, for destroying what we had. I don't even know why I did it." Dmitri looked at her silently. He sensed a touch of selfishness in her words. Her apology felt more like an attempt to ease her own guilt than a genuine effort to fix things. "Nina, have you apologized to yourself?" he finally asked. She looked at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" "You're trying to escape the pain, but until you forgive yourself, it won't matter whether I forgive you or not." Those words struck her. She buried her face in her hands, and he heard her quiet sobs again. Dmitri left her alone. He felt that he had done everything he could now. She had to figure it out for herself. That night, Dmitri couldn't sleep. He thought about Nina, her tears, and how, not so long ago, he would have done anything not to see her in such a state, but now it was different. More and more, his thoughts returned to Irina. She had become a symbol of a fresh start, of something clean and hopeful. Though the past still held him in its grip, he began to feel the possibility of breaking free for the first time in a long while. He was thinking about the future not with pain, but with hope. Winter was slowly retreating. The snow that had recently blanketed the streets now turned into icy mounds covered with a gray crust, but Dimitri's soul had no room left for dreary landscapes. The past few weeks had felt like a chess game. Every move bringing him closer to victory, a victory not just over betrayal, but over his own pain. At the factory, he felt more confident. Shifts passed more quickly, and his coworkers noticed that he seemed like himself again, calm, focused, but no longer withdrawn. Valera even slapped him on the back one day and said, "Dima, looks like life's turning around, didn't even recognize you." Dimitri only smiled in response. He didn't want to share his thoughts. Everything that was happening belonged to him alone. He felt that this chapter had to end on his own terms. Meanwhile, Andrei Lazarev's problems snowballed. Dimitri continued to follow the news, carefully reading the articles about the financial misconduct in Lazarev's company. A scandal had broken out. The company's owners discovered large sums were spent on shady, unprofitable deals. Police were investigating, and although charges hadn't yet been officially filed, Lazarev was clearly losing control of the situation. Rumors even surfaced in the media about his ties to organized crime. Dimitri suspected that some of those rumors had been fueled by his own anonymous campaign. He knew he was pushing the boundaries, but it no longer mattered. Lazarev had destroyed his family, and now he, too, was facing ruin. One evening, Dimitri again found Nina sitting in the kitchen. She looked exhausted, her eyes red as if she'd been crying for hours, yet she tried to maintain her dignity. "Did you hear about Lazarev?" she asked, almost casually. Dimitri pretended not to understand. "About what exactly?" Nina sighed, her voice softening. "He's not responding anymore. He was fired, and it seems he's in serious trouble." Dimitri felt a subtle, almost vengeful satisfaction. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "And what are you going to do?" he asked calmly. Nina looked away. I don't know. Everything went wrong, I thought." She trailed off, seemingly afraid to continue. "You thought he'd be your salvation?" Dimitri finished for her, his voice steady, without malice. "You know, Nina, people like him don't save anyone, they only destroy." Nina said nothing. Her face reflected pain and despair. The next day, Dimitri met Irina again. She had invited him to see the space she had rented for her tailoring workshop. Dimitri felt invigorated by her enthusiasm. He helped her hang shelves and install lighting. In return, she treated him to homemade pie and tea. "You know," Irina said as they sat on the floor among boxes, "you've changed a lot since we first met, in a good way." Dimitri smiled lightly. Yes, now, you look like someone who's found his place." He thought about her words. Maybe she was right. He used to live for something that had long since lost its meaning. Now, he felt like his life was filling with new meaning, even if it was different. The final chapter with Lazarev came unexpectedly. Dimitri saw the news. Lazarev had been arrested for financial fraud. It was the final blow. His face appeared on the TV screen. Tired, hollow-eyed, the man who had wrecked Dimitri's family was now in ruins himself. Nina saw the news, too, sitting on the couch. She said nothing, but Dimitri noticed her shoulders sink even lower. Her world, built on illusions, had finally collapsed. That same evening, Nina approached Dimitri. She stood at the door to his room, nervously fidgeting with the hem of her t-shirt. "Dima," she said softly, "I want to ask for your forgiveness." She continued, "I know I destroyed everything I know. I no longer deserve your trust, but please give me a chance to at least explain." Dimitri stood, stepping closer to her. He looked at her for a long time. Her eyes held so much guilt and pain that he felt the last remnants of his rage slowly dissolve. "Nina," he finally said, "forgiveness isn't something that brings everything back to how it was. It's something that allows us to move on." She nodded, not trying to argue. Dimitri realized he no longer wanted to hold on to resentment. He let it go. Not for her, but for himself. That night, he sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring out the window. The city was asleep, blanketed in soft snow. His thoughts were about the future, about the life he could rebuild. Irina. Her image kept appearing in his mind. She was the opposite of Nina. Sincere, kind, strong. Dimitri knew he had a chance at happiness with her. Justice had prevailed, but with it came a deeper understanding. It was never about revenge. The real challenge was finding the strength to move on, and Dmitri felt ready. Another week passed. Winter still gripped the city in its icy embrace. But Dmitri's own life was slowly thawing. Each new day was filled with tasks, meetings, and thoughts about the future. The past still resurfaced from time to time, but it no longer hurt. After Nina left, a strange silence settled in the apartment. She packed her things the day after their final conversation, saying she needed time to figure herself out. Dmitri didn't argue. He felt it was the right step for both of them. With Nina gone, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The apartment was his again. His space, his habits, his life. No more phone on the table. No more makeup cluttering the bathroom, but the absence no longer felt empty. It felt like freedom. He began spending more time with Irina. She invited him to help finish preparing her workshop for the opening. It was a small, cozy space, full of soul, soft-colored walls, vintage mannequins from a flea market, wooden shelves they painted together the previous Saturday. "I can't believe it's finally done," Irina said, standing in the middle of the workshop. Her face beamed with happiness, and Dmitri felt it radiating into him. "You did a great job," he replied, admiring the light in her eyes. "It's all thanks to you," she smiled. "If it weren't for you, I'd probably still be putting it off." He wanted to argue, but her words suddenly felt important. For the first time in a long while, he felt like his support truly mattered, that he mattered. That evening, they celebrated the workshop's opening with a quiet dinner at Irina's place. She baked a pie. Dmitri brought a good bottle of wine. They sat in the kitchen, talking about life, and Dmitri realized he hadn't felt this calm in ages. "You've been through a lot," Irina said, pouring him another glass, "and yet you've stayed strong." "Strong?" He smirked. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just stubborn." "That too," she noted with a smile. Irina looked at him with warmth that made Dmitri forget all his worries. Her words, her smile, her gestures were simple, yet they meant so much. That evening became something special, a beginning of a new chapter, one where there was no room for pain or betrayal. Back home, sitting at the kitchen table again, Dmitri realized how far he had come just months ago. He thought his life was ruined. Nina's betrayal had felt like the end, but now he saw it was the start of something better. He pulled out an old notebook, one he'd once used to jot down plans for revenge. Flipping through the pages, he felt the weight of the past fade with every line. He closed the notebook and, without hesitation, threw it in the trash. With that gesture, he finally let go. The following days were busy. Dmitri returned to work with fresh energy. Colleagues noticed the change. Even Valera stopped making jokes. Something in Dmitri had clearly shifted. Outside of work, Dmitri and Irina continued spending time together. Their bond grew stronger. One snowy day, while walking through the park, Irina suddenly stopped, looking into his eyes. She said, "Sometimes I think we didn't meet by accident." "I think so, too," Dmitri replied without breaking eye contact. A simple moment, but it held everything: their trust, shared pain, and hope for the future. A few weeks later, Irina invited him to her workshop's grand opening. She gathered close friends, neighbors, even an old friend who'd long encouraged her to start her business. Dmitri stood aside, watching as Irina proudly showed guests her creation. Her joy was contagious, and he realized this place had become important to him, too. After everyone left, Irina came over and gently took his hand. "Thank you for being here," she said softly. Dmitri looked at her and understood it was more than gratitude. It was recognition of the bond they had built, something real. That night, he went home smiling. He felt peace and purpose. He no longer needed to hold on to pain. He had a new path ahead, one he wanted to walk alongside Irina. Sitting at the kitchen table, he opened the window and breathed in the cold night air. The city slept, bathed in the warm glow of streetlights. Dmitri knew there would still be challenges ahead, but he was ready. He had truly started a new life, and in this new life, there was room not only for justice, but for happiness. Winter slowly gave way to early spring. Ice began to melt, rooftops dripped, the sun peeked more often through the clouds. Dmitri lived a new life. His days were filled with work, time with Irina, and quiet satisfaction. He had rebuilt himself. Sometimes he thought of Nina, not with longing or regret, but curiosity. What had become of her? Once, he saw her in a supermarket. She stood by the shelves, dressed carelessly, her face marked by sleepless nights and recent tears, hair pulled into a messy bun, red eyes. She noticed him and froze. "Hi," she muttered, forcing a nervous smile. "Hi," he replied. A long silence followed. Finally, she broke it. "You look good." "Thanks," he said shortly. She looked away, hesitating to ask what had clearly been on her mind. "Are you seeing someone?" Dmitri paused, then decided not to lie. "Yes." Her face tensed, but she quickly masked it with a strained smile. "That's good. You deserve to be happy." "Thank you, Nina," he replied, trying not to sound cold. She sighed, eyes downcast. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything, for what I did to you, to us. I thought I deserved better. I thought Andre was my chance. But it was all a lie. He used me, and when everything fell apart, he just left." Dmitri listened quietly. He felt no anger, no satisfaction, only a quiet, bitter pity. "You made your choice, Nina," he said at last. "Every choice has consequences." She nodded, barely holding back tears. "I know, and now I'm alone, completely alone." After that meeting, Nina disappeared from his life for good. He didn't seek her out, and she made no effort to reconnect, but news of her still reached him. She changed jobs often, never staying long. The friend she had during the affair turned away. Lazarev, once her savior, became a symbol of her deepest mistake. She was no longer the confident, vibrant woman she once imagined herself to be. Her life was now made up of loneliness and quiet remorse. Dmitri, on the other hand, kept moving forward. His relationship with Irina grew stronger. They found in each other what they had long searched for: warmth, understanding, support. One evening, sitting in her cozy workshop, Dmitri looked at her and said, "You know what changed my life?" Irina smiled in surprise. "What do you mean?" "If it wasn't for you, I would have stayed stuck in the past, in bitterness, in anger, but you showed me that life can be different." She looked at him with tenderness, her eyes glowing with happiness. "And you showed me that it's possible to trust again." Together, they began to plan the future. A trip to the sea, expanding Irina's workshop, even the idea of starting a small family business. Dmitri felt like life had finally found its meaning. He had let go of resentment, forgiven Nina, and embraced the lessons life had taught him. Months later, he saw Nina again. This time from a distance, she sat on a park bench, alone, with a book in her hands. Her face looked calm, but her eyes held a deep sorrow. He didn't approach her. There was nothing more to say. She had made her choice, so had he. Their paths had finally and completely diverged. This was a new chapter in his life, a life where there was no more room for betrayal, pain, or loneliness. Now, he had Irina, he had love, he had hope. And with every step forward, he was more certain. The best part of his life was still ahead.